That song just makes me happy. So I'm just all smiles. I don't know what's wrong with you. Have you ever had that season in your life when your entire goal became mere survival? There are moments in life when I think surviving is the best goal you can possibly have. When you come down with a stomach virus, survival is the only goal. You just want to make it. When you show up at the DMV without an appointment, survival's the goal there. When you're on a coast-to-coast flight, you have a middle seat, but you don't have either armrest, survival is quite the accomplishment, right? When you go see someone you love dearly graduate, but their last name starts with a B, but you have to stay there through the Z's, I don't know anything that's more survivability than just right there. You guys, there are times when survival is the whole point. It is just endure and get through it, and hopefully this passes soon. But there are so many other areas in our lives when I see people opting for mere survival, and I want to just say that's a terrible idea. When I see a couple who their entire goal for their marriage is to merely survive, I think that's a problem. I'm grateful because sometimes they're like, well, at least we aren't divorced yet. I'm like, oh, let's aim a little higher. God's intention behind your marriage wasn't mere survival. It was that you would be able to thrive. Those of us who have children, when we're trying to get through the toddler years, I realize it's difficult, but if we make survival the only goal of that stage in our family, something's wrong with that too. And I know everyone wants to say to me, Ben, but you don't have toddlers. But I did. And we got through it. Sometimes surviving, I'm sure. I was talking to a new mom in the lobby after the last gathering, and her baby was teething. I'm like, surviving's okay. Just survive. Just make it. It won't be like that forever. But God wants us to thrive in so many of these areas. When it comes to your job and you make not just one day or one season in your job about surviving, but you make day after day after day after day after day for years, your work is all about just surviving. I think that's got to be miserable. And some of us have been in jobs like that. Some of you may be in a job like that right now. I just think that's got to be miserable. But then for so many of us, when it comes to our faith life in Jesus, we make mere survival the goal there too. There's no joy. There's no passion. It doesn't seem that our faith is even making a difference in our lives, and yet we think, well, at least I'm a Christian, aren't I? Here's what I want to say to get us going out of the gate today. Too many of us are content to merely survive when God intends for us to thrive. Too many of us in this room, too many of us in our lives, too many of us in our relationships, in our families, as a church, at work, too many of us are content to merely survive when God actually intends for you to thrive. Guys, that doesn't mean things won't be hard. It doesn't mean we won't all get to survival mode at some point in time. I remember when Epic was first getting going here in the city, and I would have these days of little faith and heavy doubt, and I would begin to think of worst case scenarios. And I know some of you are like, Ben, that's a good idea, but not if you constantly think of worst case scenarios. And here's the kind of questions I would ask myself. I would say, how few people have to show up at Epic Church for us to keep the doors open? Thankfully, God did not allow me to stay in that space for long, because he would remind me, Ben, I did not birth this church so that you guys could figure out a way to keep the doors open. I birthed this church so that you could be a part of this thriving community in the heart of San Francisco. So here's what I want to ask you. When it comes to any area of your life, where are you tempted to opt for merely surviving when God is calling you to thrive? In your life right now, where are you tempted to just survive it? And sometimes that's appropriate. But where are you tempted to survive it, where God's actually saying, hey, I want you to thrive in this. I know it's challenging, but I want you to thrive. I know this stage of life is tough, but I want you to thrive. Where is that happening in your life? And today I want to ask the question, how do we thrive in our faith when everything is coming against us? How do we thrive in our faith when our circumstances are less than ideal? How do we thrive in our faith when we have every reason to just try to survive this thing called life? Well, I think the answer is a secret, and it's probably not what you think, because we're in a series we're calling Paradox. Today is week 2, and here's the simple definition of paradox. A paradox is a seemingly self-contradictory statement that is actually true. A seemingly self-contradictory statement that is actually true. And what I want to do to find the secret today is to get some words from the Apostle Paul. Paul was a man who lived in the first century. He wrote about half of the New Testament in the Bible. And when we are first introduced to this guy, he hates Christians. And so if that's you today, there's still hope. He hates Christians. He was imprisoning them. He was approving of their murder. So this guy was like totally against the way of Jesus until Jesus got in his way. And when Jesus got in his way on that famous road to Damascus, he changed Paul's life, and he also gave him an assignment. And that's not the message today, but just while I'm thinking about that, God doesn't just want to transform your life, he wants to give you an assignment. And the assignment Jesus gave to Paul on that day is that he would go and be Paul's messenger, and he would spread the movement that he used to try to snuff out and eradicate. He would propel the movement of Christianity forward, I believe, in the first century more than anyone else except Jesus himself. But he was up against some stuff, you guys. He was persecuted. He was imprisoned. He was beaten. People literally, person after person, wanted to kill this guy. And yet his faith continued to thrive regardless of what was coming against him. I want to know what his secret was, and I want to try to teach you what that secret was. How do you thrive in your faith and in your life and in this world when all the stuff is coming against you? Our text for today is 2 Corinthians chapter 4. Verses 16 through 18. And by the way, if you're new to Epic or you've been doing like a detox from your phone, that's probably a good idea. But we have an Epic Church app, and in that app, everything that's going to be on the screens today is there. Every scripture, unless I come up with some on the fly, those are there. Every note that you're going to see me give, it's right there in the app. And so why don't you stand with me? Let's look at 2 Corinthians 4, 16 through 18. Let me get us caught up to speed, and then we'll get into this text. In 2 Corinthians 4, Paul is saying to the Corinthian Christians, listen, I know that we're under the gun a bit. I know that we're being destroyed. I know that we are beaten down. But he says we still have reason to keep our faith. And then he says this. He says, we believe that the God who raised Jesus from the dead is going to raise us as well. And then you get into this passage for us today, 16 through 18. And here's what Paul writes. Because of all this, here's what you need to know. Therefore, we do not lose heart. Though outwardly we are wasting away, yet inwardly we are being renewed day by day. Why? For our light and momentary troubles are achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all. So what do? So we fix our eyes not on what is seen, but on what is unseen, since what is seen is temporary, but what is unseen is... Let's just go back to 18. So we fix our eyes on what is not seen, but what is unseen, because what is seen is temporary, but what is unseen is eternal. That's quite a paradox, is it not? Fix your eyes on what you cannot see. Have a seat, and let's figure this paradox out from Paul's secret to us in this text. Let's just start with the obvious, and some of us feel this way. Here's the reality. If all we see is all there is, we should lose heart. Yeah? Anybody else seeing what I'm seeing out there? If all I see is all there actually is, we should lose heart. I mean, when you think about what's going on in our world, when you think about some of the things happening with your friends, when you think about some of the things happening with your health or with your finances or with your relationships or with your job, if all you see is all there is, you should lose heart. If all we see is all that's happening in the entire universe, there's really no reason to hang on to hope. If all you see is all there is, you should lose heart. But what if there's more? One of the things I've been thinking about as I prepare to give this message today is, in our world today, you can see more than you've ever seen before. And I know some of you are creating that world. You do not need to feel guilty about what I'm about to say, okay? We love so much of the technology that's being created, but here's what you have to know. We are seeing more today than we've ever seen in the history of the world. And things like depression and anxiety, they are at historic levels. And do not think these are unrelated issues. They are completely correlated issues. Because we can see more than we've ever seen, we are seeing more than we've ever seen, and that is causing a lot of toxic stuff to happen in our lives. And you just need to know that that's true. You're having the ability to see more news than you've ever seen. Would you agree? right? It's not like what's your one news source. It's like what are your 51,000 news sources that you could go to? Endless websites, endless channels on cable television, and then you can find it from other places as well. You're seeing more news than you've ever seen. You are seeing the lives of more people than have ever been seen before in the history of the world, thanks or no thanks to social media. You're seeing their actual lives. You're seeing the lives of more people, and you're taking in more information than humans have ever been able to take in the entire world. You know this is true, right? And you may not agree with me, but you don't have to. I'm right. I believe with all my heart that we're seeing more than God ever intended us to see. I believe, now some of us might not be there, but I believe most of us are learning more than God ever intended us to learn. I believe more information is coming to us than God ever had in mind when he created us. And no matter what happens in the AI world, and I'm so for what so many of my friends are doing in this community, you're still going to have a soul that had intention and design behind it. And so don't fool yourself. So what are our options since this isn't going to slow down? The only option I think we have is to discipline and limit ourselves in terms of what we're seeing. I'm at my worst when I'm trying to see the most. Just me. There's so many helpful things that technology's produced in my life. But I'm at my worst when I'm trying to see not what 3 of my friends are doing, but all 3,000 people I follow, right? Like that's when I'm at my worst. And I wonder if the same is true for you. I think it's a human issue, and if we don't limit ourselves, we're going to destroy ourselves. I believe that wholeheartedly. I think the research, and I'm talking about non-Christian research, I think it backs me up on that. The stuff I've been looking at and listening to, it's pretty fascinating what happened since the smartphone entered the world in about 2007. Anyway, you can go figure that out on your own. But guys, even if we limit ourselves in terms of what we see, we're still going to see things we wish we didn't see. That's called life, and that has happened way before technology came to the place it is today. Would you agree with me? So what do you do when you see stuff that should cause you to lose heart? How do you not lose heart? When you see a negative bank statement, how do you not lose heart? When you see an illness beginning to destroy your body, how do you not lose heart? When you see your marriage on the brink of extinction, how do you not lose heart? When you not see all the injustices we see in the world today, how do we not lose heart? Yesterday, my entire family, we had the privilege of serving over at City Impact for their conference, and a number of you were there, and a lot of people in our city and from even other states. And as we were handing out grocery bags to the residents in the Tenderloin yesterday, the thing we would do is say, hey, is there anything happening in your life that we could pray for you about? And some were like, no. And I was like, I was praying anyway. Who cares, right? I mean, silently. I didn't want to get beat up. But I'm praying anyway. But people would begin to tell us their story. And as they began to tell us their story, let me tell you this. If all they could see is all that there is, I have no reason to encourage them and keep my integrity. You with me? Right? Like when I'm trying to encourage my kids in spite of what's going on in their lives just in this world, when I try to encourage so many of you, if I think all that there is all that can be seen in your life, I am doing you a disservice to try to give you some false sense of hope. Right? A Christian cliche is not going to help you if it's not true. And so what is going on in our world that can keep us from not losing or forfeiting the hope that we have? There must be something happening that we cannot see, and that's the whole idea. Here's what I want to say from a principle standpoint. What is it that I want to say? Yes, here's what I want to say. When we fix our eyes on the invisible God, what's invisible in us begins to grow in spite of what's going on outside of us. I'll say it again, a little bit clunky, and I know I should have tightened it. When we fix our eyes on the invisible God, what's invisible in us, it actually begins to grow and blossom in spite of what's going on around us. Let me tell you a faith that you don't need today. You and I do not need a faith that is correlated one-to-one to our circumstances. I was born with that faith. Anybody else? Like, Ben, why are you so happy? Well, I got this grade. She said, yes. There's money in the bank. Nobody hates me, right? I mean, I have that faith. I was born with that faith. Anybody else born with that kind of faith? One-to-one correlation, you're like, it's all great, it's all terrible. My faith does the same thing that my circumstances do. I need a faith that can withstand the stuff that's coming against me when it comes against me. I don't need faith when all is well at my job. I need faith when I don't have one or I wish I didn't have the one I have. That's when I need faith. I need faith not when the doctors going, Ben, you have perfect health, by the way. Good doctor's reports lately. But I need faith whenever the doctor's going, hey, there's something wrong. I don't need faith when my kids are doing everything that I want them to do. I need a faith that can withstand the stuff that comes against me. And that's the kind of faith you need too. It's not a false faith. It's not just trying to give us a crutch to hold us up when we go through this terrible stuff in this world. There's something that can be deeply embedded in us. And another thing that I want to encourage you to do is to realize what's happening outwardly in your life. All of us are aging, right? We know that? Like if you're 2 or 82 in the room, you're aging. You're like, Ben, I don't want to age. The alternative isn't fun. Last night, my wife came in and she's like, hey, I got a new moisturizer for you to try. I'm like, what's wrong with my current moisturizer? I'm an Aveeno guy and I'm not going back. I'm just getting old. There's nothing you can do with this. But I'll try it. I want to be a good steward of our resources because she bought a massive bottle of it. I'm aging, right? I mean, I'm decaying, at least in this body here, and so are you, even if you're young and fit and healthy. But others of you, it's not just that you're aging, you're going through a severe trial in your life. There's a relationship issue, there's a work thing, there's a family dynamic happening in your life, and you're going through something, and you need to know, like, is this all there is? Here's what I want to say, really, another principle out of this text directly. Here's what you need to do. Give your focus to the things that weigh the most and last the longest. Give your focus, right out of the text, I'll tell you how Paul said it. I spun it a little bit different. Give your focus to the things that weigh the most and last the longest. Here's how Paul said it. For our light and momentary troubles are achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all. I've got a confession to make to you, and I'm being genuine. This is not one of those, hey, I'm going to tell you I've got problems. No, I really do. One of the things for me, and I'll let you tell me if you've ever experienced this, is that I have this tendency to give great significance to things that are not that significant. Am I the only one? Am I the only one that loses their mind and loses perspective at certain moments of life? Anybody, and the rest of you are lying. We'll talk about that later. I lose perspective. I'm like, why is it a big deal that the person went at the four-way stop before me? But I'm like, this is so significant, right? And the other thing I do, even out of this text, is I pretend like, or I tell myself that the things that are temporary, that they're going to be with me forever. Anybody else? Right? You begin with, like, one thing happens, you're like, I'll never. Like, dude, chill. It's not that significant, and it's not going to last forever. I'll tell you a practice that has been helping me, and it's not a perfect thing yet for me, but it's been helping me. I ask myself this when I'm facing a hard decision, when I'm going into a big personal conflict, when there's a ton of criticism coming my way, or whatever the case may be, and I'm tempted to go, here's what I've been doing. Ben, 6 months from today, will you care this much about this issue? Ben, 1 month from today, will you care this much about this issue? Ben, this time tomorrow, right? Will you care? And the answer is usually no. Sometimes it takes me a while to speak to my feelings and emotions. But the reality is, the stuff that used to bother me 3 months ago that I thought would be with me forever, I can't even remember what it is to tell you what it was. And yet we treat it like so heavy. Now, the reality is there are some things in life that are very heavy, and there are some things in life that could be with you your entire earthly life. And Paul still says, even about those heavy things, even about those long-lasting in your life, forever kind of things, he still says those, compared to what's ahead for you, they're light and momentary. Paul is not putting your issues down. He is not saying, oh, it's not a big deal. He's just saying, compared to what's ahead and to what's actually weighty, even the stuff that you feel like that is literally burying you right now, it's not as heavy as what's ahead for you. He talks about the glory of God. Often when we think about glory, it comes up in a worship song, this idea that we're prizing God, or we're valuing God, or we're worshiping God. But the word worry doesn't, but the word glory actually carries with it a weight. The idea is that it's something weighty. God is glorious. He's weighty. Something that's glorious. It's weighty. And what Paul is saying, not to give us motivational language so that we can survive this life, he's trying to tell us the greatest reality is what's ahead for you. And everyone in the scriptures, hear this, because a lot of us don't want life to ever end on this earth, and I'm not going to volunteer otherwise. But everything in the scripture says things about how short our life is here and how long our eternity is there. Everything in the scriptures. Like everyone who is having a great life and everyone who wanted their life to be different than it was. Everyone would say it. So Paul's like, hey, don't give weight to what's temporary, give weight to what's eternal. Jesus said, store up treasure on earth. No, why? Because the treasure you store up there is going to be a lot longer lasting. I want an investment that goes the distance. That Jesus said, set my heart there. People would say things like, who are we? We're like grass that's here today and gone tomorrow. I hope you're encouraged. Give yourself to what is heavy and what is eternal. That's what he says right in the text. Here's what's eternal for every one of us who have, by faith, trusted Jesus and given our life to him as best we know how. What's eternal for us is that we will be in the presence of Jesus forever. What's eternal for us, Jesus promised us there would be no more pain, there would be no more tears. He promised, Paul said this actually to the Corinthians in another place. He said, one day, for those of us who have placed our faith in Jesus, we will know God fully, even as we are fully known by God. That's pretty incredible. That's what's ahead for us. That's the invisible reality that we need to put our faith and anchor it to, because that is the great reality. Some of us are just acting like this season is all that there will ever be in our lives. And I want to tell you, it's not all there will ever be in your life. I wish it would be different in this season than it currently is for you, but God has something better in store for every single one of us. This is why I want to advocate that you read, meditate on, memorize, and apply verse 18. So, how do we do this, Paul? Here's the secret, you guys, from Paul. So, we fix our eyes not on what is seen, but on what is unseen, since what is seen is temporary, but what is unseen is eternal. Fix your eyes. It's quite a paradox, though, isn't it? How do I fix my eyes on what I cannot see? This might be the most counterintuitive of all the paradoxes we're going to cover over these 9 weeks. Fix your eyes on what you cannot see. Fix your eyes on what you cannot see. And here's why you've got to fix your eyes on what you cannot see. If you and I will fix our eyes on God rather than everyone else and everything else, we will begin to step into things we would have never stepped into before when all we had were physical eyes. Do you know to carry out God's purpose for your life, you're going to have to develop spiritual eyesight? Otherwise, isn't there always a reason not to step into what God has for us because of what we can see? When God called us to start this new church, we're almost going on a decade, or about a decade since I first heard that idea pop into my heart and mind. I could see a lot of things that caused me not to want to step into this, right? I saw rent prices. This was 2010. I was like, I can see that. And now I'm like begging like you are, let's go back to 2010 prices. Yeah? But I could see that. I could see the school that my first grader at the time had been placed into. He was cool with it, but I couldn't see the school God was going to move him into a week later. I just couldn't see it, right? I could see growing up without a yard, and I'm like, how's that going to go, right? My kids still haven't learned to mow the lawn. We'll figure it out, guys. But you know how to do so much more. Right? I just couldn't see it. I couldn't see people actually wanting to show up at a church that we created. I just couldn't see it. But God had to give us eyes of faith. Those of you who are entrepreneurs, you would have never started something if you had to be able to see it with your physical eyes, because you couldn't what? See it with your physical eyes. A lot of you who have these amazing families, you couldn't just look around and go, nobody looks around and goes, this is a perfect time to have a kid. Do you? Right? You have to believe in what you cannot see. So for you, where do you need to trust God, but you can't see it with your physical eyes, or even in spite of what you see with your physical eyes? Let me tell you how Moses did this. Hebrews 11:27, great verse. It says about Moses, so he left Egypt, listen, not fearing the king's anger. He persevered because he saw him who is... All right, let's keep that up there because I want to make sure everybody could see it. Didn't sound like they did. Come on, if I'm not looking and you're looking and I'm saying and you're not saying, we've got a problem. You're like, Ben, you're the only one of us in the room that gets a paycheck for this. All right, listen, here we go. Moses is going up against the most powerful person in the known world. 400 years of slavery. How did he do what he did? He left Egypt not fearing the king's anger. You're like, Ben, king must have been a chill guy. It was Pharaoh. How did he step into it knowing the king is there? 400 years, slavery. He persevered, meaning he kept going in his faith. How did he keep going? The same way you're going to keep going. He persevered because he saw him who is... Can you? Can you? The future of your faith depends on it. But Ben, I can see. I know what you can see, but can you see? Here's a great question. You would do well to ask yourself this question, or let me ask it to you. What can you see? What can you see that threatens to keep you from trusting the one you can't see? I'm going to ask it again. You can say it out loud if you want. What is the financial reality? What's the relational situation? What's the health thing? What's going on in your company? Who put you on probation for the next 90 days that if you don't get your performance together, you're done? What can you see? Because you have something. What do you see that threatens to keep you from trusting the one you can't see? What do you see? Landlord notice that rent's going up? Child born with a deformity? Marriage on the brink of extinction? Maybe papers have been served. You see that. That doesn't provide a lot of hope. What do you see that absolutely threatens to keep you from trusting the one you cannot see? Moses could see Pharaoh. Moses could see his people enslaved. With his physical eyes, he could not see deliverance, so he had to develop eyes of faith. You're going to have to develop eyes of faith. I know that you don't know how it's going to work out. You're going to have to develop eyes of faith. Now, here's the really good news. Some of you are like, Ben, I'm the type of person who has to see it before I can believe it. You might find it hard to become a Christian. I'm joking. Sort of. I want you to know that God knows how you're wired because he wired you. I want you to know that God knows where you're at. He knows your vulnerabilities. He knows the honesty within you. And I want you to know that God meets you in that place. I want to show you an encounter Jesus had post-resurrection with one of his disciples. You may even know this story. This guy actually gets his whole nickname is about this story. You probably have heard about Doubting Thomas. But I want you to see that in Thomas's doubting, Jesus meets him where he is, and yet he challenges him, after encouraging him, he challenges him to go somewhere different. Listen to this text, John 20, 24 through 29. Now Thomas, also known as Didymus, one of the 12, was not with the disciples when Jesus came. So the other disciples told him, "We have seen the Lord." But he said to them, and I hear this all the time from some of you, "Unless I see the nail marks in his hands and put my finger where the nails were and put my hand into his side, I will not believe." He got his nickname appropriately. A week later, his disciples were in the house again, and Thomas was with them. Though the doors were locked, Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." Then he said to Thomas, "Put your finger here, see my hands, reach out your hand and put it into my side. Stop doubting and believe." Thomas said to him, "My Lord and my God." Jesus said back to him, "Because you have seen me, you have believed. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed." Do you see how he meets Thomas in his doubts, but he calls him to something else? I love this. So many of us are like, "Oh, we've got to jump across all these lanes before Jesus will accept me," and other people give you the message, "No, just stay where you are. He's cool with it." No. Neither of those are true. He meets you where you are, but he wants to spur you on to something better. And some of you today, the whole message is stop doubting and start believing. You're like, "But Ben, I've got these doubts still." We all do. Unless there's space for doubts, there will never be space for faith. And let's get over having to have everything known before you can jump into it. You can't know everything about a job, but you've taken a job before. You can't know everything about your future spouse. You need to know some things, please. But you've gotten married, right? You don't know everything about a vacation outside of what you've seen on the internet, and yet you still go there. Some of you need to do this with your faith. Stop doubting and believe. Sometimes, or one day there was Jesus was like, "Come on, believe." And this guy said, "Lord, I believe, help my unbelief." You're like, "Ben, no, that's where we live most of our lives. Like, I believe Jesus, but there's a part of me." What I want to do today, if you're an atheist, a skeptic, an agnostic, or even if you're a Christian who just doesn't know anymore if this is worth you latching your life to, here's what I want to give you. It's just a prayer that's going to help you voice something I know many of you are feeling. I'm going to say it a few times just so you gravitate towards it. Here's the prayer. God, give me the spiritual eyes of faith to see what I wish I could see with my physical eyes. God, give me the spiritual eyes of faith to actually see by faith what I wish I could see with my physical eyes. How many of us have something we wish we could see differently with our physical eyes? Okay, 6 of us. Rest of you are living the dream. Like, "No, Ben, what I see is awesome by itself." And just utter that prayer of honesty and going, "God, okay, I believe, help my unbelief. Would you give me spiritual eyes of faith to see what I actually wish I could see with these?" Some of you today, maybe all of us today in some different kinds of ways, we're being called to exercise faith. The future of your faith, and let me say this, it's going to sound weighty, and I intend for it to sound weighty. Where you spend eternity will have everything to do with whether you can fix your eyes on what you can't see with your physical eyes. But not just eternity, your life here, your ability to thrive here has everything to do, just like it did for Moses. If Moses could only see this powerful person in 400 years of slavery, he's not going for it. If all Esther could see that is, if she goes to the king, she might be killed, she's not going for it. If all Abraham could see, which wasn't much, there was so much uncertainty, he would have never responded to God's call to become a father to many nations. And your future is at stake, just like theirs would have been different too. How many people do we not read about in the scriptures because their stories were not worth telling, because all they got consumed with, all they focused their eyes on was what they could see with these? God's wanting to develop something in you. Will you trust him? Let's pray. God, thank you so much for your love for us. God, thank you that you have given us so many things. The scriptures say that we see your creation, and that should give us faith to some degree. God, we look at our past, how you've provided for us. We hear the stories about Jesus' death and pending resurrection, and that should build our faith. But God, you know what we see in our lives. God, you know what's threatening to keep us from trusting you. God, some people in this very room have a health issue, and wow, it's scary, God, and they don't know if they can trust you. They can see the report. God, would you give them more faith in you than they have in that report? God, there are people in this room who have a relationship, even marriage difficulties, really, like it might be over soon. God, help them to see more than just what has been so far, to see that you can redeem and you can restore. God, there are people who literally don't know if they're going to have the same job they have 1 month from today or have a job at all. God, would you give them eyes of faith to see what they can't see yet? And then, God, for the person who's just in a trial of some other sort, whatever that might be, God, would you give them eyes to see and focus on the God who's invisible? And God, we want to just say with Paul, because of what's true about you in us and what's true about our future with you, therefore we do not lose heart. Though outwardly we are wasting away, yet inwardly we are being renewed day by day. For our light and momentary troubles are achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all. So, church, we fix our eyes not on what is seen, but on what is unseen. Since what is seen is temporary, but what is unseen is eternal. God, would you lift our eyes? In your name we pray. Amen. I want to ask you to stand. And Zach and team, they're going to lead us in this song that's just going to declare that, God, we're in. Help our unbelief. God, we're committed to who you are and, God, what it is that you want to do in this world and in our lives. Let's sing.